Hello and welcome. In today's video, I wanted to take a look at a couple different Death Guard lists that have done rather well within the new Nephilim chapter approved rules, as the Death Guard have seen quite a lot of changes. If you're interested, check out my video I did that covers the different changes the Death Guard saw within the new chapter approved, and I'll leave a link in the description below for you to follow at your convenience. Anyway, with that being said, let's start by taking a look at our first list today. This first list placed second place out of 26 players, and was played by a player named Logan Heath in the Orange County Classic GT. This tournament was held in California, USA, and was held on July 16th in 2022. And with that being covered, let's dive right into the list. This list begins with a single battalion detachment composed of the Mortarian's Anvil Plague Company. The list starts off with its HQ choices, as battalion detachments tend to do. The first HQ choice is a Lord of Contagion. This Lord of Contagion is the warlord of the list and has been given both a trait and a relic. He comes armed with a Plague Reaper, which does give him a bit more of a higher base output than a Man Reaper would, but it does mean he does not have access to the cleaving profile. And don't forget that a Lord of Contagion does have that nice little ability that extends his contagions by an additional 3 inches up to a maximum of 12 inches. Now with that being said, let's take a look at the warlord trait and relic that this Lord of Contagion comes with. The warlord trait that has been assigned to him is the all-popular Arc Contaminator. The Arc Contaminator is an aura that says core units within 6 inches reroll the wound roll for plague weapons within melee combat. They also reroll the wound roll for ranged plague weapons within 12 inches of their target. This is a very powerful ability, and we'll see how powerful it is within this list considering how many melee capabilities this list has. Now as for the relic, this Lord of Contagion has been given one that is rather surprising, which is a Fagaris Helm. The Fagaris Helm is a bit of a strange item that we haven't really seen before. All it does is it adds 3 inches to the different auras that the bearer has to a maximum of 12 inches. Do note that while the contagions are very similar to auras, they do not function as auras and as such do not benefit from this bonus. This means that the only benefits that this relic has is extending that Arc Contaminator aura and extending the Lord of the Death Guard aura, which is a standard Lord aura which allows core Death Guard units within 6 inches to roll hit rolls of 1. And this is a bit interesting as it's a rather rare relic that shows that this list is going to be leaning very heavily into melee and short-range firepower on plague weapons. Let's continue on by looking at what else this list includes. The second HQ choice for this list is a Plague Caster. The Plague Caster is a popular HQ choice and one that does not compete with other Death Guard HQ choices. This Plague Caster has not been given any upgrades and has access to 2 different psychic powers. The first psychic power the Plague Caster has been given is the popular Miasma of Pestilence. All the Miasma of Pestilence does is give a friendly unit -1 to hit when enemies target that unit for attacks. This is a decent buff to the already high durability of the Death Guard forces, so it's definitely one that you'll see quite common and one that is very popular within Death Guard play. The second psychic power that the Plague Caster has been given is the Gift of Plagues. The Gift of Plagues simply extends the contagion range by 6 inches. This can actually do quite a lot considering that contagions are a decent part of the Death Guard arsenal, and when you extend that range, you can definitely make use of some of your shooting weapons a lot more effectively, considering that in most cases, enemies within melee are going to be suffering from the contagions anyway. This is once again a very popular psychic power and one that you'll see within many Death Guard lists. So far we haven't seen anything particularly special outside of that one relic on the Lord of Contagion. I'll also mention that the Lord of Contagion and the Lord of Virulence are both becoming more of a niche choice within different lists and are being taken over by the Plague Caster and the Demon Prince. That being said, they both see a decent amount of play, though it is nice to see that they're getting a little bit more of a resurgence. Now continuing on with this list, we'll come to our troop choices. This battalion detachment has chosen to make quite a good use of its different troop options. The first 4 troop choices are all the same, being composed of 10 Plague Marines each, and these have been given quite a few different upgrades, considering that all of the upgrades for the Plague Marines have been made free within the Nephilim chapter approved. To begin with, we have to look at the champion by himself, as he has quite an arsenal of different choices. The champion of each of these units comes armed with a Demonic Plague Blade, a Plasma Gun, and a Power Fist. This champion has quite good firepower at a range, and has quite good output within melee as well, giving him a lot of different options of how he wants to attack within melee combat. The generic Plague Marines have been given quite an arsenal in themselves, with 2 different Plague Marines being armed with cleavers, 2 different Plague Marines being armed with flails, 2 different Plague Marines being given a Plague Mace and an axe, and 2 different Plague Marines being given Melta Guns. 1 Plague Marine has also been given a Blight Launcher. These units are definitely very melee focused with the different melee special weapons that they've been armed with. As such, they'll be an incredible force to be reckoned with within melee combat and can utilize things like the Haze of Corruption stratagem to great effect in order to deal devastating damage to anything that comes within contact. The one thing I'll point out that's kind of interesting about these units is that they've been given 2 melta-guns instead of 2 blight launchers. This seems a little bit strange at first, as generally people prefer the blight launcher over the melta-gun. However, it does make sense when you see the rest of the list. That being said, we can probably discuss the melta-gun already. As these units are all melee units, the melta-gun is probably going to be within range to make full use of its rather heavy-hitting profile, whereas the blight launcher has a bit of a weaker profile, although at a longer range. One thing I'll mention is that this list does not particularly have any great ways of dealing with different vehicles except for melee combat. And while it can do a decent amount of work within melee combat against vehicles, it would definitely struggle a lot more if it had blight launchers as opposed to melta-guns. Not only that, but in certain situations where an opponent is using a vehicle to screen, you can get within range to take out the vehicle with the melta-guns and then proceed to charge the unit that is being screened if the vehicle is destroyed. Additionally, the same applies to transport units where you can take out a transport, allow the enemy to disembark from the transport being destroyed, and then charge the unit that has been disembarked afterwards in order to deal with it within melee combat. Though do note, you do take on a little extra risk because if the vehicle explodes, it can definitely do some damage to those Plague Marines. In any case, I do think the inclusion of the melta-guns over the blight launchers is an interesting choice, and one that can make quite a lot of sense within an army such as this. Though do keep in mind, I don't think it's such an obvious choice as choosing melta-guns, plasma guns, or blight launchers within units like this, and rather it always comes down to how the rest of your list is structured. In any case, with that being said, let's move on to the last 2 troop choices within this battalion detachment. The last 2 troop choices are smaller units of Plague Marines being composed of 2 units of 5 Plague Marines. These 2 units of Plague Marines have the same armament on their champions as the units of 10. And while these units mimic the units of 10 in certain ways in terms of their normal Plague Marine armaments, they are a little bit different, and that these units both have chosen to arm their Plague Marines in the following way: a single Plague Cleaver, a single Plague Flail, a Mace and Axe, and a melta-gun. Once again, we see the preference of the melta-gun over the blight launcher, and these units of 5 are definitely a good way of including some additional weapons within the army while also giving yourself some additional units that you can have a little bit more table coverage with, as opposed to a single unit of 10 which would give you very much the same armament. However, you'll be losing out on some of the options that the champion can take, and you would have 1 unit instead of 2 units to spread across the table. That being said, one thing I would have liked to consider is maybe making these smaller units more of a range focus as opposed to a melee focus unit as this list has done. There's definitely certain benefits to having melee units, however you already have 4 units of incredibly threatening melee choices within the first 4 troop choices, so I would have liked to consider maybe some more range output by maybe choosing to give this unit something like plasma guns and blight launchers instead of some of the melee options. That being said, there's nothing wrong with going with melee focused units, it's just that it kind of limits some of your diversity within armament choices, and while they can definitely play within your favor, I do think this list has plenty of melee options as it is, and we'll see that as we continue on to the lead choices. This list pretty much concludes with the lead choices and does not include any fast attack choices or any heavy support choices. The first 2 of these elite choices are 2 units of 5 Death Shroud Terminators each. These units are pretty much armed the same way, with double Plague Spark gauntlets on the champion, and each of these units have been upgraded to have a relic. The first of these units have been given the Plague Skull of Glugotha relic. The Plague Skull is a rather nice relic that can put out quite a few mortal wounds, though it is a once per battle use relic. And what this relic does is it says once per battle, at the end of your movement phase, you can select an enemy unit within 6 inches of the bearer of this relic, and you roll 7d6, and for every roll of 4 through 5, that unit suffers 1 mortal wound. On a roll of 6, that unit suffers d3 mortal wounds. This means on average you'll be scoring roughly 4 plus mortal wounds against the enemy unit that you select. This is definitely a decent number of mortal wounds and can definitely do some work. One other thing that the first squad of Death Shroud Terminators has been given that the second squad hasn't is one of the newly reduced deadly pathogens. The deadly pathogen the squad has been given is the Virulent Fever, which says that unmodified wound rolls of 6 cause an additional mortal wound in addition to any attacks. And if you look at the number of attacks the champion has 5 base attacks, which go up to 10 attacks if he uses his scything profile. With the 2+ weapon skill, this can definitely generate a couple of mortal wounds within every single combat phase for a low cost of 15 points. More importantly, the deadly pathogen does increase the strength profile of the champion by 1. This means the champion of this unit goes up to 6 strength and 8 strength within his respective profiles, whether he's using the scything or cleaving profile with his Equipman Reaper, and this can definitely increase his strength far enough to be within a different bracket when making wound rolls against different enemies. and this can definitely let him wound in situations where he otherwise would have failed to do so. I definitely think the deadly pathogens are a good choice within units like this, as the additional strength is very powerful and the additional benefits are always nice to have as well. As for the second unit of 5 Death Shroud Terminators, they have been given a relic but have not been given a deadly pathogen. The relic that they have been given is on their champion and is a Reaper of Glorious Entropy. The Reaper of Glorious Entropy replaces the Man Reaper that the champion is equipped with, and it functions in many cases like the Plague Reaper of the Lord of Contagion. What the Reaper of Glorious Entropy does is it doubles the strength of the user, gives them 3 armor penetration and 3 damage per attack. It also has a Plague Weapon keyword, and unmodified wound rolls of 6 deal an additional mortal wound in addition to their normal damage. This is definitely reminiscent of the Virulent Fever deadly pathogen, and does show that this list is trying to take advantage of the different mortal wound output that it can have, whether it's the Plague Skull or the deadly pathogen or this relic in this situation. As for how the Reaper of Glorious Entropy compares to a Man Reaper, it essentially adds 1 strength and 1 damage to the cleaving profile of the Man Reaper, and does not have the -1 to hit that the cleaving profile of the Man Reaper or the Plague Reaper naturally has. In addition, it gains that special ability to generate mortal wounds. However, it does lose access to the scything profile that the Man Reaper has, which is nice for clearing out swarms, and all in all, I would say it's just an okay upgrade that's nice to have if your army list wants it, but it's one you can definitely forgo if you don't think you need it. Moving along to the third elite choice of this list, the third elite choice is a Foetid Varion known as the Foul Blightspawn. The Foul Blightspawn is definitely a popular inclusion within melee lists such as this, and can do quite a lot of work. This Foul Blightspawn has been given both a trait and a relic, however he's not been given a deadly pathogen, as is common to see on Blightspawns, which is normally the Viscous Death. I would have definitely liked to see the inclusion of the Viscous Death on this Foul Blightspawn, however I can definitely understand why it wasn't included, as this list does come out to 2,000 points, and as such it does not have points to include that upgrade on this specific unit. In any case, let's take a look at the trait and the relic that this Foul Blightspawn has been given. For the relics, the Foul Blightspawn has been given the Revolting Stench Vats, which is a very popular relic within melee-focused armies. And as you can see, this army is incredibly melee-focused, so the Revolting Stench Vats is definitely going to do a lot of work in this situation, and is a very obvious inclusion. However, for the trait that has been given to the Blightspawn is a little bit of a different one, being the Gloaming Bloat, which is the special Warlord trait and the special contagion of the Mortarian's Anvil Plague Company. This special contagion says that enemies within range of this contagion cannot fire Overwatch and cannot be set to defend. Once again, a great ability for melee-focused armies, as they'll want to perform as many charge rolls as they can, and be able to negate anti-charge abilities such as Overwatch or set to defend will definitely benefit them when they're trying to get within melee combat using a charge attack. In addition to this, the Gloaming Bloat says that enemies cannot reroll the hit roll or wound roll when making attacks, and this is once again very good, as this can definitely cripple certain armies that heavily depend on those rerolls to function within combat. And I'll also say at this time that the stratagem of the Mortarian's Anvil is definitely a good one as well, as it allows units to heroically intervene when a unit within 3 inches of those units is charged, meaning that anytime a unit within this battalion is charged, they can essentially have a bunch of melee-focused units heroically intervening on top of them and causing all kinds of havoc against your opponents. Definitely a very powerful ability to have, and the fact that it can be multiple units heroically intervening instead of just one just further adds to the ability for this army to really create some havoc within melee combat. And moving on, we come to the fourth elite choice within this battalion detachment. The fourth elite choice is Biologus Putrefier, and the Biologus Putrefier can definitely help some units inflict some mortal wounds and is definitely very popular within melee builds such as this one. Definitely the Biologus Putrefier started out within the 9th edition rules as a bit of a weaker unit and one of the Foetid variants that you didn't see very commonly. However, now with the increase in use of Plague Marines and things like the Death Shroud Terminators, he's definitely found a home within many army lists. This definitely does help improve the combat patrol for the Death Guard forces, as all of a sudden you're seeing the Plague Marines see a lot of play, you're seeing the Biologus Putrefier have new life. Though on the other hand, you definitely see a decrease within Poxwalkers, and Typhus is kind of a so-so inclusion. That being said, don't forget that Typhus is a Lord of Contagion in himself, and can be substituted out for that Lord of Contagion within this army list if the points can be found for him. Typhus is definitely a force to be reckoned with, and can do quite a lot of work with his stat profile and the different abilities and war gear that he brings to the table. Though he does limit you in certain ways, so you definitely do have a trade-off in that situation. That being said, I definitely think Typhus is in a fine enough place, and can be an asset to different Death Guard forces. However, the Lord of Contagion is definitely a perfectly fine option as well, and in this list I do think the Lord of Contagion is a better choice because of the points limitations that you have, as well as the ability to bring the traits and relics that he does. In any any case, that being said, let's move on to the fifth and final lead choice of this list, as well as the final unit that this list includes. The final option within this list is another folded variant, being a single Tallyman. The Tallyman has definitely gotten a boost within the Nephilim rule set, as he can help you generate some additional command points, which is always nice considering that you start off with less command points, and any additional command points you generate within the Nephilim rule set is always definitely a benefit. And in addition to that, he can tally for a unit, giving that unit +1 to hit. Considering you have those large units of 10 Plague Marines and even 5 Death Shroud Terminators, getting +1 to hit with many of those melee weapons can definitely improve the output of your different units. And combine that with the aura abilities of the Lord of Contagion, and all of a sudden you have some very deadly units that have become even more effective thanks to all the different buffs that they're gaining from your folded variants and your different HQ choices. All in all, I'll definitely say that this list is a very interesting one that very heavily leverages the new Plague Marines as well as the melee aspects that the Death Guard offer. I'll also say it is a very melee-focused list that definitely has a very interesting inclusion within those melta guns within the different units, as it does take into account that it might struggle taking out vehicles in certain situations, and the short-range profile of the melta guns is perfectly fine when you're trying to get within melee combat anyway, and the Blight Launcher would definitely be a little bit weaker in this kind of build. However, it could offer you the ability to take out some units that might be at a little bit of a further range and have a little bit of a weaker profile. That being said, don't forget you still have the Teleport Strike on those Death Shroud Terminators, so you can definitely utilize that to take out certain objective units for your opponent if they're not careful with how they position them. All in all, I'll definitely say this is a very focused list, and one that would be very terrifying to play against, especially if you're an opposing melee army, because all of a sudden this list can definitely go toe-to-toe with you, and can definitely make you regret going within melee combat against them. That being said, it is definitely a slower list, so certain lists that can take advantage of them by using different range profiles to kind of take out different units can definitely give an army list such as this some serious headaches if they take full advantage of their ability to pick off different units before they get within melee combat. That being said, this list can definitely camp certain objectives very effectively, and it can definitely put up a fight against different range armies. I will say this list can definitely struggle against certain things like Imperial Knights, however the inclusion of those melta guns definitely give it some ability to fight against those army lists as well. I really like this army list, and I do think it's a very creative way of playing the Death Guard forces that definitely takes advantage of some of the Nephilim changes that have been introduced. One thing I'd like to mention before we move on to the second list about this first list is that if you look at it, it spends a total of 6 command points, which is its entire command point allotment within pre-game spending. This is kind of interesting because I didn't think Death Guard would be quite as spendy, though looking at this list there's definitely a lot of room for them to spend quite a lot of command points, and I do think that's something that you have to make as a choice for yourself because not every list is going to want as many relics and traits as this one does. However, with that being said, in many cases you will probably be spending up to 3+ command points before the game even begins. So something like the Tallyman can definitely be an interesting inclusion for regaining some command points early enough in the game so that you have the right amount for the first couple turns. In any case, as I said, this is an interesting list, and with that being said, I think we can kind of move on to the second list. The second list we're going to look at today is pretty much going to be the inverse of the first list, and it's going to be one that focuses a lot more heavily on vehicles as opposed to troop choices. The vehicles within the Death Guard forces definitely saw a big enough points reduction that they can kind of form their own army, and you can even make some interesting mixes of both the infantry and vehicle choices. In any case, these two lists are kind of extremes of both these varieties, so let's take a look at our second list. The second list placed first place out of 72 players, and was played by a player named Richard Hill. This list was played in the Gonghammer Grand Tournament in New South Wales, Australia. It was played on July 16th, 2022. I will say one thing, the reason I didn't put this list first is because, well, it's going to be a little quicker to cover, but also because there are a few errors with it and some missing information, so it's definitely going to be a little harder to cover, and we're going to have to make some assumptions based on those errors. From what I can tell, there are no malicious errors within the list, and all of the points and everything add up. However, there are a few errors that are more of a typo issue than an actual issue with the list itself. I just wanted to clarify that just in case, because as we start looking at this list, the first thing I'll say is this list did not list the plague company for which one it chose, though I could make certain assumptions based on one of the detachments. So here goes, this list begins with a Spearhead detachment composed of the Inexorable Plague Company. That being said, it will become very clear that this is not actually a Spearhead detachment, but rather an Outrider detachment. This is very much a small clerical error, and doesn't really make any difference within the grand scheme of things. It's just a small error in terms of the name of the actual detachment. The command points and everything else still play out the same. It's just a matter of how many fast attack choices versus how many heavy support choices you can include or have to include within the list. Anyway, with that being covered, let's continue with the list. The first and only HQ choice of this list is a single Death Guard Demon Prince, and he has been given the all-popular Hellforged Sword, as well as a pair of wings to help out with his mobility and his ability to get within combat. This Demon Prince has also been given a relic known as the Suppurating Plate. The Suppurating Plate is a fine enough relic which gives him a 2+ normal save, and if the bearer loses any wounds within the fight phase, you roll a d6 and on a 2+, the enemy suffers 1 mortal wound. This can definitely help with both the survivability and the ability to inflict some damage onto your opponent whenever you lose any wounds. The Demon Prince is a highly durable character that has a lot of capability within melee combat. However, I should also mention that the Death Guard Demon Prince, like all Demon Princes, is a Psyker. However, this list did not mention which psychic powers he has, so I can't really make any assumptions there, as psychic powers are something that are individual to what the player chooses. I'm not sure which ones he would choose, and as such, I'll leave that up to your imagination as we move on to the second type within this list. The second unit type within this list is a single elite choice being composed of a single folded Varion known as the Tallyman. Once again, the Tallyman makes an appearance within this list, and as mentioned before, he does give you those additional command points potentially, as well as being able to improve the hit chance of certain units. That's always a nice perk to have, and the Tallyman is definitely going to be a popular elite choice within Death Guard forces within this new chapter approved edition. I can definitely see him seeing play in the majority of lists, considering he was already pretty powerful before this and was seeing a decent amount of play. Now he's all the better with the different changes that we saw within this edition. In any case, this is a pretty standard choice for the elite slot and one that makes a lot of sense within this list, considering the other choices that we'll see within it. And none of the other forwarded variants would have made much sense within this army list anyway. Moving on, we come to the signature unit choice of the Outrider detachment, in this case being the fast attack choice. The first 3 fast attack choices are a single bloat drone being armed with the flesh mower. The bloat drone is definitely a fast moving unit that really does compensate for some of the Death Guard's mobility issues, and that flesh mower weapon does have enough output to pretty much deal with most units within melee combat. The flesh mower is definitely very powerful, and the bloat drone is a very good option for the Death Guard forces, considering it saw a decent enough points drop within the last chapter approved. It's definitely improved in power, and it was already pretty strong as well, so this list definitely has a very powerful melee component within its bloat drone selection. After that, the 4th and 5th fast attack choice are composed of 2 units of 2 Blight Haulers each, and the 6th and final fast attack choice is a single unit of a single Blight Hauler. Most likely this is a points restriction, as I believe they would have taken more Blight Haulers if they could have. The Blight Haulers have definitely seen a points drop as well, and bring a solid amount of firepower as well as decent enough melee to the Death Guard forces. These Blight Haulers can definitely take on swarms as well as heavily armored targets, so something like the Imperial Knights list is definitely going to feel the damage from those Blight Haulers and their multi-meltas. All in all, I do think the Blight Hauler is a definitely good unit and has definitely seen an increase in power as 9th edition has gone on. I do think we've been seeing more Blight Haulers within lists as time has gone on as well as a result of this. And now we're seeing lists that are kind of going very heavy into the fast attack choice to pretty much build a vehicle list within the Death Guard forces. And there's one last unit type within this Outrider detachment. That unit type being a single heavy support choice being composed of a single Plague Burst Crawler. This Plague Burst Crawler being armed with 2 entropy cannons and a heavy slogger in addition to its signature mortar. And the Plague Burst Crawler has definitely seen a major buff within the Nephilim changes, seeing a rather heavy points reduction. Though it did see a little bit of a nerf with the indirect fire changes, I don't think that's the biggest thing in the world, considering how durable the vehicle is and how much heavy firepower it can put out. It can definitely be perfectly fine without ever using that indirect fire and will definitely hurt any enemy that it targets. As such, I definitely think it's a perfectly fine inclusion, even being included as a maximum of 3 within Death Guard armies. In any case, you can definitely see this is a very heavy Outrider detachment composed of incredibly armored targets. This is also very much a vehicle list and very reminiscent of lists we've seen in the past, though now it's all the stronger due to the different points reductions. And this list does not conclude yet, as it includes one more detachment. This last detachment is a Supreme Command detachment being composed of the Inexorable Plague Company. This is the only detachment that had a Plague Company listed, and as all detachments have to have the same sub-faction nowadays, I'm assuming the first Outrider is also the Inexorable. So do keep in mind that is a little bit of an assumption I had to make, and I don't know if that's necessarily a true assumption or not, but it's a pretty safe one, I believe. In any case, in this situation, the Supreme Command is composed of a single Mortarion. Mortarion is the warlord of this army, as he must be, and he has been given a trait. Don't forget that when Mortarion gets a single trait for a single command point, he gains access to a total of 3 warlord traits. Those 3 warlord traits being the all-popular Arc Contaminator, and then the Living Plague, as well as Revoltingly Resilient. And on top of that, when the game begins, Mortarion gets to select yet another warlord trait, by picking one of the unique contagions available to any of the plague companies and being considered to be armed with it. This gives him a lot of versatility in terms of choosing which special contagion he wishes to utilize within any game, depending on who your opponent is, and this really does help him out in a lot of ways. Don't forget that even with all this value, Mortarion is still a rather expensive unit and does eat up quite a lot of points, though generally I'll say he can be an incredible beast within combat and an incredible beast on the table as a whole. That being said, he's still 450 points, and he's a little bit fragile compared to some of the other character choices of similar types. He does have a 3+ normal save, a 4+ invulnerable save, and even a 5+ feel no pain save thanks to that revoltingly resilient warlord trait. Don't forget he also has disgustingly resilient, a toughness of 8, and 18 wounds total. However, as I mentioned before, a lot of other characters of his type do have a little more durability because they either have damage negating abilities built in that rival Mortarion's own abilities, or they have something like a maximum of 3 damage per phase, such as the Catan or Ghazghkull Thraka, and in a lot of cases, they're cheaper in points. So Mortarion does have a little bit of a boom-bust situation, though I do think he is playable. However, I do think he's a little bit more of a niche choice than some of the other characters out there in the wild. Anyway, with that being said, Mortarion is a Psyker, and he does have access to quite a variety of different psychic powers. And this list did list the 3 psychic powers that Mortarion knows for his different psychic powers. The first 2 psychic powers are Miasma and Gift of Contagion, as we saw within the previous list, so we won't really cover those, but the third psychic power is a bit of a different one. The third psychic power is one that is rather common for the Death Guard forces, being the Curse of the Leper. The Curse of the Leper is an offensive psychic power, unlike the first 2, which are more of a defensive and debuff psychic powers. And Curse of the Leper says, when you manifest this power, you select an enemy unit and you roll 7d6, and for each of those rolls that exceeds the toughness of that enemy unit, you generate 1 mortal wound on that unit. This is a 50-50 chance on any unit that has a toughness of 4, so in most cases you're probably generating on average 3 mortal wounds with this ability. However, that can definitely change if you're targeting really low toughness units or if you're targeting really high toughness units. In either case, it's definitely one of those psychic powers that can do a lot of work in a lot of situations, though it is very limited based on who your opponent is. As for his 3 different warlord traits, we already know what our Contaminator does, and we already know what Revoltingly Resilient does, which is that 5+ feel no pain save. And there's one last trait, which is Living Plague. Living Plague is an aura ability that says enemies within 3 inches do not benefit from any friendly auras that they would normally benefit from unless those auras are from psychic powers. This is definitely a very powerful ability that can really cripple some armies that heavily utilize aura abilities. However, in certain cases, it can also be rather useless as some armies don't really depend on any aura abilities at all, so it's definitely going to be one of those boom-bust abilities. However, that being said, considering you get all 3 of these traits for a single command point, it's definitely well worth investing in it, and Mortarion will definitely find use of all these different abilities throughout different games. All in all, Mortarion is definitely a beast of a unit, though like I said, a bit fragile and a bit expensive. In any case, this concludes the second list, and I would definitely like to know what you think about these 2 different lists. Let me know in the comments down below if you prefer the style of play that the first list offers, or if you prefer the second list. That being said, I should also mention that I've seen a lot of other types of lists that use more of a variety of units, and have a bit more of a mix of different things that the Death Guard have to offer. Though that being said, just because these lists kind of both skew in a certain direction, I do think there's enough variety in both these lists. They'll definitely make both these lists very interesting to play on the tabletop. Anyways, as always, thank you for watching, and as always, I want to give a big shout out to my patrons. You guys are really awesome people and really do help support the channel. In addition to that, I would like to say, if you know anyone who may benefit from this content, please do share this video with them, as it not only helps the channel, but it also helps them out as well. And if you've enjoyed the content, do subscribe and like for future videos from this channel. Thank you for watching and have a great day. Bye.